Hey everyone, welcome to this week's release of the Hashrate Happy Hour podcast. On today's show, my guest is Cody Nelson. Cody is the COO and co-founder of Bit49, a Bitcoin mining hosting company whose mission is to leverage the massive demand for Bitcoin mining to accelerate the adoption of green energy worldwide. Cody and Bit49 have years of experience in sourcing Bitcoin mining sites that pay close attention to the energy mix, and they bring a unique perspective to establishing some Bitcoin mining industry standards. On today's show, Cody and I will talk through how Bit49 got its start first building out GPU mining rigs to scaling up to the 20 megawatts that they currently have in the US today. We will also discuss how Bit49 vets and establishes new Bitcoin mining sites, like the one that they have in Glencoe, Minnesota, the positive benefits for the larger grid system when it comes to load shedding and the unique power profile of Bitcoin mining, and also some of the key aspects and areas that Bit49 is leaning into to establish industry standards for the Bitcoin mining hosting space. This was a thrilling conversation with Cody, who has a dynamic background and a great perspective on how Bitcoin mining and the Bitcoin mining hosting landscape should look in the future, and how to source unique power relationships. So with that, I hope that you enjoy today's show with Cody Nelson. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Like I said in the introduction, I'm here with the co-founder and COO at Bit49, Cody Nelson. Cody, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Looking forward to the conversation today. What I'd love to do, and where I'd like to start with our conversation, Cody, is I'd love to hear more about your background. You have a pretty unique background, and I'd love to hear your journey into Bitcoin mining, and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Most people in the crypto industry have a very varying backgrounds. I was at doing undergraduate work. I originally started in computer science, doing coding, heavily coding, but then also interested in hardware. So I got into a little bit of that. I did about a year or two of schooling there at the college level. And then I kind of had a spiritual experience that led me down the path of physical therapy. And so I ended up getting my bachelor's of science. I went on to get my doctorate in physical therapy, and I practiced for 5 years. That fifth year of practice, my brother-in-law, he was at Stanford getting his MBA, and he's like, "Hey, this crypto thing," and I'm like, "What crypto thing?" and so I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm building cryptocurrency mining rigs, particularly GPU mining rigs to mine Ethereum, other various altcoins. And he's like, I've gotten so much interest in my rigs that I can't keep up with the orders doing school, and this. And I'm like, well, I could help out. I've built my fair share of computers in my lifetime. And so I started building them for him. And what turned into what at first started out as like one GPU rig every day or two turned into, you know, two or three every day. And then and then I'm like, okay, I got to make a decision because I can't do 10 or 12 rigs a day,
Oh wow,
and
yeah.
also have a full-time job. And so, I made the decision to kind of step away from physical therapy temporarily, at least, just to kind of do this and see where it led. We did that for about a year. We were building GPU mining rigs, and then the altcoin crash happened. And so we're like, okay, well, what do we do now? So we pivoted into hosting, and we had about 10 megawatts operational in Russia, and we were managing hosting operations out there. And we did that for a year and a half. Basically, got out before the shit hit the fan, and with Russia and U.S. relations. And so we pivoted. One of the things that we learned while we were hosting there was that you can't rely on boots on the ground to get the stuff done that you need to get done.
Mm.
And so we realized very quickly we needed to vertically integrate. We need to have our own data center so we can be, the master of our own ship, and so that's kind of what led us eventually to starting up a data center in Glencoe, Minnesota.
Uh, um, Wow, I'm that's incredible. What a start. Like I said, I knew your background was unique, but it just maybe we don't have to spend a ton of time on it, but starting at a 10 megawatt site in Russia. So how did that come to be? If you can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy connection. So my brother-in-law, while he was doing his MBA at Stanford, he was classmates with a guy named Igor, who was from Russia. And Igor was the one that approached Phil and was like, "Hey, I'm going to start a data center out there. Are you interested?" And um, at the time, he was like, "No, I'm not interested." But then, down the road, we got to this juncture, and so he reached out to Igor, and Igor was like, "Yeah, let's do this." And so we ended up, getting machines coordinated to go out there, which was interesting in and of itself.
I can
Um,
imagine.
there's there's all sorts of weirdness regarding shipping in and out of Russia and ownership of property inside of Russia. That yeah, that was an interesting situation. So um, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. That's incredible. What a really cool first like jump into crypto Bitcoin. That's pretty cool. Um,
And just to add on to that, it was also at some point in time during the latter end of us hosting in Russia, we also realized in the progress of kind of vertically integrating, we needed the ability to repair machines once we started our own data center too. So I actually shipped out. I went out to China and out to Shenzhen, and I went through Bitmain's repair training course. And this was like right before COVID hit, I think. So I was probably the last class that they hosted in China before they started shutting everything down. Went through that course, came back to the United States, and made some key hires and started up our own repair center to do repairing of ASIC miners.
that's very cool. I've also actually looked into some type of Bitcoin mining repair training. I think now they offer some of that training here in the US, right? I think there are some Bitmain certified training that you can do in the US, right?
Yeah, in fact, that was so we reached out once I started up the repair center. We reached out to Bitmain and formed a partnership, and we became their primary repair training center. So we not only do repairs, but then we also bring clients in, customers in who want to learn how to repair ASICs, and we train them from, you know, the bottom up and varying levels of, expertise in the field as well. Like people that, you know, barely know how to solder to people who are electrical engineers. We have the whole gamut. And so it was really fun to run those trainings. We do it for Bitmain, we do it for What's Miner. Pretty soon here, we should be able to do Avalons as well. So we do trainings for all of those major manufacturers.
Oh, that's very cool. And I know that we will come back to that. I'd love to maybe just back up a little bit and go back to, so we started in Russia, saw the need to bring that back home more or less. And I'm guessing that's what led to the start of Bit49. Is that is that right?
Uh, the start of our hosting services in the US.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And there's been a renaissance of sorts to bring all of this back because what started Bitcoin mining kind of started and was very heavy in China until they cracked down and shut down all mining. A lot of that moved to Russia, Kazakhstan, some even in Africa and South America, but the greatest push was into the United States, and you started to see all sorts of very large mining farms go into operation. Compute North, Northern Data, all sorts of very large Compass mining outfits that started up shop, and we decided to do the same thing. So
Very cool. Would you mind just touching on or give us the who's who of Bit49? Like give us your elevator pitch for who Bit49 is?
Yeah, so we like to talk about a few different things. One, we're really big into being responsible consumers of energy and essentially helping to move the planet towards more sustainable energy. Um, we'll get into more of the weeds of that, I think, later on in the podcast. But essentially, Bitcoin mining is a great way to upgrade our electrical infrastructure and get it more green. So that's one big thing. The other thing is we like to pride ourselves on being kind of counterculture to the typical, stereotypical cryptocurrency hosting or even cryptocurrency, company. Um, those most crypto companies out there tend to be not very transparent. They tend to overpromise, underdeliver, um, or even flat out just lie. And so, we like to be counterculture that. All of our customers come back and they're like, uh, super surprised at how honest and transparent we are, how we deliver on what we say we're going to do, and if we miss the mark, we somehow make up for it. And that's just, I think, how you do business and how businesses should be run. And so that's kind of our philosophy with how we run our business. Um, One of the other things that we really are pushing towards is trying to get an industry standard for hosting and for repairs. There's just so many repair outfits, hosting outfits out there that um, are just not up to snuff. They don't have the kind of quality that mature industries do. And so we want to raise that bar so that people have a better experience altogether with whether it's hosting or repair side of the business.
Yeah, I personally am in the market for, hosting and have hardware hosted, and I have seen a very interesting mix in the landscape. That's for sure. So when you're talking industry standards, that's something I'm very excited about as a consumer of hosting services. I think there's a real need for it, especially when you start to look at like customer protection too. So yeah, that's good to hear. I'm excited that you guys are making that push and that's an initiative for you guys. Um, you mentioned it very briefly. Glencoe, Minnesota is one of your guys' hosting sites. Maybe help us understand how you landed on Glencoe, Minnesota, of all places. And by the way, for you, Cody, and the listeners, I'm only 30 minutes from there, so I know the area. So I'd love to hear how you guys landed there.
Yeah, very, very interesting story. And I've spent quite a bit of time since we launched in Minnesota, to the point where when I come back, my wife will often mention, "Well, you're talking like a Minnesotan. You got the O's." You're like, "Oh, okay, all right."
Oh, you betcha.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's really fun. I do love Minnesota. I never had been there before, and so setting up shop there has been quite the experience. But yeah, in the process of looking at sites, and we've looked and vetted over a dozen sites all over the U.S. Anywhere from Florida to Texas, Minnesota to California. We've been all over the state looking at these viable options, and one of the things that impressed us most was Dave Meyer. He's the commissioner of Glencoe Light and Power Commission, and he was just super friendly. Doing our due diligence, making sure that everything, lined up. Um, and everything just kind of lined up, fell into place. And that's, one of the things, there's a whole number of things we look at when we're vetting sites. Obviously power pricing is a big one because for Bitcoin miners, that is the biggest expense by far,
Yep.
of operations. And so you can't really run a successful operation if you're paying retail price for electricity. But also things like proximity to generation and transmission, how friendly the city is to crypto mining, and the people that you're going to be doing business with. Also local talent, what does that look like? Which was actually one of my reservations when we were first looking at this, because it's such a rural site. It's in the middle of nowhere. Glencoe is this teeny little town.
Very rural.
You know,
Yeah.
it's an hour outside of Minneapolis. I'm like, are we going to be able to find people to work at our data center? That was a legitimate concern. And yeah, you know, I don't know. I think we have to attribute God to making sending the workers our way because yeah, being able to find the talent that we did, we have an awesome crew out there, and they are amazing. And I don't think I could have done it without the help of God. So
Oh, that's great. And maybe just to touch on that, because what I'm finding in all these conversations that I have, both with the Bitcoin miners and the power companies, is the economical impact to the local, community is important. You guys have a handful of people full time working on that site, don't you?
we do, and that's one of the benefits to bringing in a mining outfit is that you're going to have to staff it. You're going to have people doing maintenance, upkeep, all sorts of operational day-to-day things to be able to keep operations running. And that helps not only employ the local community because we're not going to hire someone from out of state to come in and work there. We're going to hire local talent, but also the money that we're spending on electricity, goes directly. Those taxes go directly into the coffers of the local municipalities and cities. So there's definitely a benefit there, and we try to do our best to be considerate of the city and try to give back and help grow the city because we're as much a part of the city as the neighbor down the street that has a home. So
And again, being a Minnesotan, that's a highly valued thing, especially in those rural communities like that. Just to know that is being highly considered when an outfit like this is coming to town, especially something so new. I mean, Bitcoin mining it's been around for 14 years, but people are still. I had a couple calls today where people, that was the first time they'd heard of it. So it's
yeah,
it's awesome to hear that you guys keep that so front of mind and bring that value to the communities. Another value that you guys bring and that I'd love to hear you touch on a little more is load shedding and curtailment and the strategy you guys have around that with the town and with MISO in general. You guys actually contribute to the greater power grid. Could you maybe touch on what that strategy looks like and what that's doing?
yeah, great question. Because this is one of the things that we were learning when we were first reaching out to different sites. It's like, why are you interested in having Bitcoin mining operation in your city or outside of your city? And it's interesting. We were looking at a couple different sites in the Midwest, not just looking through Kansas, Nebraska, Minnesota, that kind of thing. And especially in Kansas and Nebraska, the vast majority of your electrical consumption is irrigation pumps. And those draw power during the growing season. And then when it's not growing season, you don't have that load anymore. And so, especially there in the Midwest, they're very interested in bringing in Bitcoin mining to take some of that capacity and provide a base load year round that provides them a revenue source that they would otherwise go unrealized outside of the growing season. And since there is excess capacity, it's a win-win. We can, as Bitcoin miners, we can take that excess capacity. Municipalities and cities get the money from the taxes and whatnot, and ultimately everyone wins in that situation. So it's a really big opportunity to be able to, utilize that energy that would otherwise go wasted. One of the things I learned is that when they set up like a nuclear plant, for example, say
Mm-hmm.
they set up a nuclear plant, 1 gigawatt worth of energy right off the bat. It's not like you get some of it, it's either on or off.
Yep.
There is no part way. So if you set up a 1 gigawatt, nuclear power station and you only have 500, half of that demand for it, that other half is wasted. Like they can't utilize that power. So that's another, reason why if there's excess capacity on the grid, monetize it, through Bitcoin mining, and then that revenue can go back into building infrastructure, repairing infrastructure, and building out more green sources of energy to provide more green power to the grid.
We'll be right back after this message from our sponsor. Support for this episode comes from Sunnyside Digital. Are you ready for the next Bitcoin bull run? Get ahead of the game by building out your Bitcoin mining infrastructure now. Sunnyside Digital is your one-stop shop for everything Bitcoin mining, from transformers and switchgear to racks and miners. With a white glove approach to understanding your needs, they'll provide you with the hardware you need at the most competitive pricing possible. Say goodbye to your sourcing headaches and say hello to Sunnyside Digital. Contact their sales team today at sunnysideinc.ca or via email at bwalsh@sunnysideinc.ca. All right, now back to the show. First of all, the irrigation pumps being the largest draw of power, I didn't know that at all. That's funny to hear that, and so interesting that that's the biggest source of power draw in the summer. And then yeah, I mean, from a revenue standpoint, because again, these power companies, some of them are privately owned, and they're trying to create revenue for shareholders. And then you've got municipal, so all these people are trying to generate revenue. What do you do in the wintertime here? I never even thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
um
Yeah, and it's not so much the case in Iowa and Minnesota because you guys don't have to do irrigation. And that's something I learned from when we, went to Minnesota. I'm like, where's all the center pivots? Like, I don't see any irrigation. And they're like, oh, we don't need it. I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, cryptocurrency mining also is a very unique power profile in that we're on 24/7,
yeah
365. We're on all the time. It's not like an industrial plant or a commercial plant where they're online and consuming energy when workers are there, 9 to 5 or whatever. And during the night, they're not consuming energy. So same thing there, like Bitcoin miners can take that base load of energy and utilize it and monetize it when it would otherwise go to waste because, your plants are shut down during the nighttime type of thing. And like you had mentioned about curtailment and load shedding, so the other unique factor about Bitcoin mining is the fact that we don't unlike a traditional data center, we don't have to be online 99.99999% of the time. We can be offline a certain percentage of that time. And that's not only beneficial in the sense that we don't have to consume power when it's most expensive, but also it helps the grid out. Okay. So there's a number of programs that MISO set up that we participate in to help lessen the impact of Bitcoin mining on the grid. The kind of first line of defense, I guess you could say, is called the price response program. And that's where if the price gets above a certain point, obviously price and demand are positively correlated. So the higher the price is, the more demand or more, strain there is
yep
going to be on the grid at that time. So if we can curtail when prices are high, we can help decrease the demand and decrease the strain of the grid before it even happens. So it's kind of a proactive program. You could think of it that way. The second program is called operating reserves, and that's kind of if there's a disconnect between generation and demand, like say a coal power plant goes offline unexpectedly and we're at a power shortfall on the grid. Well, what they can do is call upon those resources to shed their power or curtail and lessen the impact of that power plant going
and
offline.
how
Right?
often does that happen?
So price response, again, because it's a proactive program, it happens quite frequently, and it's pretty consistent on when it happens, right? It's always going to be like towards the middle of the day, especially in the summer when everyone's running their AC, when the max consumption is, right? And then on the outskirts, the morning and the end of the day, typically you don't have to curtail because consumption is down. People are at home, less demand. Operating reserves is a little different. That one, again, like can happen at any instant. Like we could get a call right now and they're like, I need you to go offline for the next half hour or hour, and so we'll shut down. And so that one's a little more as well as the last program. So the last program is emergency demand response, also load modifying resources. And that program is also like shut down now. And it's like the last line of defense. This is like, we have a serious emergency. And if we don't shed load, then we're going to have rolling blackouts, you know? And so obviously we want to participate in that program because we would prefer to curtail so that, you know, you can have
Yeah.
lights on in your home rather than us, you know, greedily staying online just because we want to make the
Right.
Bitcoins,
And I
right?
would imagine that that third bucket happens less often. I think it's something like, from what I've heard and seen and read, it's something like 5% out of the year that that type of an event happens. Is that, from your experience, is that pretty? Yeah.
It's very It's very rare, yeah. So I would actually say that emergency demand response is probably more like 1% actually. And then operating reserves is probably somewhere in that 2 to 3% of the time. And then everything else is pretty much price response, the proactive, because that's ultimately better. If we can be proactive rather than reactive, it's going to help smooth out those
Okay.
spikes in
Yeah.
demand.
It sounds, the one that you explained, that, you know, you have three, like kind of three different times of the day, you know, two off peak and then on peak, or commonly called like the shoulders and then peak. That one, I, and you tell me if we can go down this path, but is that one of the strategies you guys take advantage of? I would imagine if you do, it gets a little tough running a hosting business just with the, or maybe you guys can weather the peaks because it all kind of smooths out on a blended rate.
So yeah, I mean, we have a 95% guarantee for uptime. So if there's anything less than that, obviously we're going to refund our customers. And that 5% allows us to not only be responsible consumers, you know, of electricity, but also help make that grid more stable, right? We don't want to make it unstable by providing Bitcoin mining services. So that 5% is huge, in allowing us to be that not only for our customers but also for the electrical grid. Does that answer your question?
Does, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's, and what's interesting about all this and crazy about it all is, you go down to ERCOT, and I mean, it's quite literally the wild, wild west down there. You got
Yeah.
energy brokers, you got power companies, you've got ERCOT itself. I mean, it's just this. I'm hopefully I can talk to somebody down there to you know, just further educate myself and the
hmm
listeners on that grid system, because it's so different than how it is up here. How do you guys balance the strategy when you're looking? I mean, that it's just so complex
It
and complicated when you're looking at different grid systems.
it is crazy in Texas. It's more like a free market should be, I think. In that, like my brother-in-law now lives down in Texas, and so I was talking to him about it. He was like, yeah, like here, kind of like how you can choose what sanitation company you use, and there's like two or three options on who picks up your trash. Down
Hmm.
here, when you go to, you know, get your electricity turned on, there's like 9 or 10 different electrical outfits or utilities you can go to get power, and you can shop around and find the best rate, best service, and really kind of pick and choose what you like. So in that sense, it's kind of cool because I like that they are their own thing. They can kind of help facilitate natural market conditions that the average retail customer can take advantage of. And it's not beholden to, you know, utilities or agencies to kind of be the gatekeeper of the electricity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, at least from what you hear of people's approach down in Texas, is that, you know, Bitcoin mining is another avenue to help with the expansion of green energy production. Um, you don't hear it so much in the conversation up here in the Midwest. I don't know if you guys hear much about, you know, kind of Bitcoin being a good add-on for renewables up here in the Midwest. Maybe you could touch on that.
Yeah. What's interesting is you can actually go onto MISO's website and you can see the power mix. You can see which forms of generation there are and what percentage they are of the total generation. And last time I was on there, like natural gas is the highest, but it's a lot smaller than you think. I was thinking nat gas is probably 50, 60, 70% of the electrical grid, but actually that's not the case. 35% for natural gas generation. Otherwise, wind 25%, coal 20%, nuclear 15%. There's a few nuclear plants in the Midwest, and then solar and others like 2 to 4%, somewhere in that range. So actually, quite a bit. We're seeing more and more kind of green technologies come out and be a bigger player in the industry. Whereas 10, 20 years ago, you didn't have the wind, so you got that 25% generation from coal. So if you look at it that way, okay, we've already decreased our dependence on coal by 25%. That's pretty impressive over 10, 20 years.
Yeah, and Minnesota is one of them, but a lot of the states up here in the Midwest are making a really aggressive push to carbon free in 20 years. So it's kind of let's hurry up and get solutions in place to achieve that.
And I love that. I love the push. What I don't love so much is kind of what the kind of route California has taken, in that they're mandating that. Let the free market play out. Because if green energy truly is cheaper and cleaner and people want it more, then the market is going to selectively, select for that, rather than let's keep doing what we've been doing that's more expensive and, worse for the environment. So I'd much rather have the free market take care of that through supply and demand, rather than forcing it to happen. And again, with Bitcoin mining helping to monetize that otherwise wasted power, now they have money in the coffers to invest in these kind of greener technologies and deploy them in mass.
Yeah. And also be able to have that reliable base load. I think that's hopefully that winds itself into the conversation more and more. That if you want to build out wind, the wind's not always going to blow. You need a base load, and if you can't monetize that base load, the power companies are going to have problems. It's just the fact of the matter. And it's similar to one power company I was having a conversation with about residential solar, and it's like a disincentivization program for the power company, because in the way they put it was like, God forbid we have to actually pay that customer. Not only did we lose the customer, but now we have to pay them. And then when the sun's not shining, we have to supply them power. So it's this, it's definitely a more nuanced conversation, and hopefully Bitcoin mining can continue to play a big role in that.
Yeah, and most end users don't think of that. They don't think of, oh, I'm putting the utility company out of business, But that is the reality when you look at it from their perspective. They're putting themselves out of business by incentivizing such activity. While it's good in the long run, there's better ways.
Better paths forward for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of pivot here, I'd like to maybe go back. You mentioned you went all the way out to China to one of Bitmain's repair training classes and just beat COVID. So you're able to sneak in and out before the COVID pandemic. So that's good. Um, how has that played a big role for Bit49?
That's a
The
great
repair piece.
It's a great question, and it's a funny story. I try not to rag on Bitmain too much, because they did provide the opportunity to go learn. But having been a physical therapist practicing and been to many trainings and in services, I know what a professional training looks like, and China's training was not that. It was very far removed from that. I mean, instead of, PowerPoints, there was cardboard boxes that they would write in Sharpie on and show it to you.
Oh no.
But not only that, they would write it in Chinese, and so the translator would have to translate what was written in Sharpie on the cardboard box to us, and then we had to try to figure it out. It was it was a bit of a nightmare, and I'm kind of surprised I came away with anything. But I did learn enough to come back and be able to apply it, and even make some discoveries in the whole process of learning the different failure modes, to be able to put together a very comprehensive training program that people can benefit, so they don't have to go to China to learn off of cardboard boxes.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's oh man. What a wild experience. I'm impressed that you were able to come away with the skill set there, cuz I like when I open up some of the miners, I it's all foreign to me, so that's really cool. So as Bit49 looks to continue raising the bar in the hosting space, that's a big piece for you guys, is continuing the education in the space, but then you guys are also doing that at kind of an enterprise level on the repair side as well, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you to back up and ask that again because my Bluetooth cut out, and so I'm gonna disconnect from my phone so it doesn't connect. Do that again.
Okay. playing
Okay,
playing some music for
I'm
you.
disconnected now. So go ahead and can you ask that last question again?
Yeah, so I was curious, as Bit49 is continuing to look to raise the bar in the hosting space, um, and with the repair training, you guys are also doing this on what I would call an enterprise level as well for the repairs, right?
Yeah, so we do take all sorts of, we take enterprise level customers that send us, hundreds and thousands of machines at once. But we don't like to forget our roots. We don't like to forget the retail customers that help us become who we are today. And so, we'll never turn away a retail customer. If they approach us, we're happy to take them. Kind of our sweet spot is that mid range, someone that has somewhere between like 5 to 100 machines. That's kind of our bread and butter. But happy to take, and we have contracts with enterprise contracts as well as retail customers. A lot of people, when we first started doing repair trainings, people were like, "What are you doing? Like you're putting yourself out of business," you know. But because you're training more techs to do repairs that you are not going to get to repair. But the reality is, it only stands to improve the situation of the repair industry, and as well as we realize we can't handle the entirety of the repairs that need to happen, that are out there. So, if we could increase the workforce and make it a more competent workforce, then that only takes off the stress off of us, but also all the other repair outfits, and helps improve the quality overall.
Absolutely. I think the just kind of keeping the eye on the ball as far as like strengthening the Bitcoin network, and playing a part in helping that is crucial. Um, maybe so just to kind of switch gears a little bit again on you, when looking at the hosting space as like an industry, again, I know I mentioned it earlier, I've been to a couple as I was vetting out space, and have seen all sorts of different configurations and setups and approaches to the industry. What are some of the things that you guys are looking to kind of map out as industry standards for that hosting space?
That's a great question because I've also visited many hosting sites, and yeah, some of them are absolutely like barely workable. It's like
Shocking. It's
I'm not
so
sure.
shocking.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you're doing anything in this space, but you are, and it's barely working. So, but even just some minimum basic requirements of things like an intake filtration system. Okay. Like, I mean, you'd be appalled at how many facilities don't even have some basic level of filtration, even just a screen, if not an actual filter. Um, or things like having, adequate overcurrent protection, and um, also things like having on-site people that are competent to be able to do, basic machine level troubleshooting and repair. I know that there's a number of outfits that have approached us and are like, hey, can we send people to you to train as an operation, like train our people to handle normal day-to-day operations, so they know how to go out and troubleshoot a machine and be able to tell whether it's a fan or a PSU that went out, stuff like that. And I think that's also something that the industry could improve significantly, is having more competent hands, there on site, boots on the ground, things like that. I mean, again, intake filtration, you'd think everyone should have that, but
Yeah.
no. And it's amazing when we see miners in that need repairs, we know immediately what kind of situation they're in. And we know whether there's been water encroachment or dust or dirt or bugs. You'd be amazed at how many bugs we've pulled out of machines. But yeah, we'd like to clean up the industry a bit, for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I have a bit of experience in commercial multifamily real estate. And when you look at managing 10, 20, 30 apartment units, you have to have systems in place, and you have to really know, in the Bitcoin mining space, you have to know how to go out and troubleshoot and be able to navigate the facility, even just to figure that out. All things that I think will eventually make it to this space, and hopefully you guys get to, can continue to play an integral part in that. I think what
Yeah,
would be kind of a fun question to ask you and to get your opinion on, if a customer were just getting into the hosting space, what would you recommend that this customer do for some due diligence?
that's a great question. I would start with word of mouth, because there's if a hosting company is legit, they're going to have plenty of customers. And if if they are a good hosting company, they're going to have plenty of customers willing to tell their side of the story of how their experience is. Things like uptime, you know what I mean? Things like operationally, do you get a bill every month, or do you get a bill every 6 months, and they're frantic for you to pay because they've haven't sent out a bill in 6 months. Um, so operationally, things like responsiveness. When you ask about a machine that's not hashing correctly, or hashing low, or not hashing at all, how quickly do they get back to your inquiry and respond, and provide you options or opportunity to have it repaired, or otherwise remedied, things like that. Even doing site visits, I would recommend you do site visits, because I wouldn't host my miner anywhere unless I knew the conditions it was going to be in. And we've seen machines that were running in Florida, and they were just so corroded, and I was like, I would never host in Florida. I'm sorry, like there's just way too much salt in the air that's going to corrode your machine. Um, so stuff like that. And do they have intake filtration and adequate hands, boots on the ground, and all that kind of stuff is good to ask.
Yeah, and I think for someone who may not be like electric savvy or like savvy, I mean, some of this infrastructure stuff gets pretty big and crazy. So I would even venture so much to say that someone who's not like electrically inclined, if you go into a facility for a site tour and it just doesn't look right, like just like a gut check, there might be something worth some questions you want to ask, or maybe some things that you want to, maybe look into a little bit more. Because some of it can be pretty overwhelming, the size of some of these facilities.
Mhm.
And yeah, someone who may not know their way around big, heavy cables that are as big as your forearms, that might be a little intimidating to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. If you had a friend that was like an electrician, that might be one good to bring with you, to make sure that
Yeah.
their facility is up to code, electrical code, and not just wires everywhere. Oh, yeah. So I'd probably bring someone along. I know enough now, having built data centers. I know what the electrical code is to do so. But yeah, your average retail customer is not going to know that. So having a buddy or having someone come with you that knows what they're talking about electrically might be a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so and I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place in the conversation, but maybe to go back to, as this industry is evolving and growing, is Bit49 looking to continue growing in the Midwest, or are there other geographic areas that you guys are maybe a little bit more interested in? And if so, why?
Yeah, we're constantly looking at additional sites. We're very, very picky in where we go, and it has saved us in the past, and it will save us in the future. So, um, we got very close to doing a deal, elsewhere, and it became very evident that the local government was not for it, and so we don't want to be in a place that we don't want to be wanted. You know what I mean? Like we want to go somewhere where we are accepted, and that we're not going to have to constantly fight against, neighbors, against city council, or whatnot. So we are exploring lots of sites, and we have high hopes to continue to build out and to expand. We're building out a lot of our own internal processes, making them more efficient, so that we can scale. Because one of the difficulties with running a hosting company is diseconomies of scale. There's a big difference between running 20 megawatts and running 200 megawatts. You need quite literally an army of financial analysts and technicians and all sorts of HR management, to be able to handle that amount of customers. And so we're building out our processes so that it can be a much more pleasant experience for the end user, for the end retail customer, to enjoy. And if you want to talk about the future of Bitcoin mining, I actually could see. I don't think it's far fetched to think that we will run into a bull run, this year, and we could see Bitcoin going back up to where it was before, and maybe even going significantly higher than that. Um,
Hmm.
and if that were to happen, I could actually see more of a um, kind of a centralization, or companies buying out other companies. And that can only, well, that has the opportunity to improve the space altogether, because then again, you have this standardization of processes that can deliver a higher quality hosting experience to more people, rather than this is Joe that runs 10 megawatts out back, and he will send you a letter in the email with your invoice. you know
Yeah. Yeah. Um, you touched on a lot of good things there. Just the scaling, it's a real challenge. And I think some of those challenges were brought to light in a pretty big way with some of the publicly traded companies filing for Chapter 11. I think a lot of that just had to do with getting out over your skis with having such massive infrastructure in place and needing the team to support that. And it's a new industry.
hmm
It's a new industry with a lot of, and they're really smart, but everyone's generally on the younger side, and you've got young with a new industry, and yeah, scaling and figuring those processes out it's a huge hurdle.
Yeah, 100%. And electrical infrastructure has a pretty pricey price tag. It doesn't come cheap, and so developing property, developing infrastructure, takes a lot of time and takes a lot of money. And if you end up over leveraging and spending too much money on the electrical infrastructure, now you can't hire up enough people, and you can't buy the machines to actually do the operational side of things. And so I think that's what we saw a lot of, last year. And hopefully, again, like hopefully it's hard lessons learned, and it only stands to improve the industry as a whole.
Yeah, and I think it will. I think it will, especially with companies like you guys with Bit49, like just taking your time to build out the right processes. I think that's what you're going to see take place here. You mentioned very briefly that one of the things when you're looking at some of these new areas that you guys will actually start to get plugged into like the local governments. How quickly in that process do you guys touch base with a local government?
It's pretty early on in the process because we don't want to spend a lot of time vetting a site, making sure that the site looks good and has the appropriate connections and is close enough to infrastructure to be able to move forward. We want to make sure that's something that we can vet out in the beginning before we put all this legwork into, all the other stuff that has to happen.
And if I can ask, what are some of those roadblocks that you guys might run into with the local government that's not friendly towards you guys? And this is just me not having a lot of exposure to that portion of it, but what type of things are signaling to you guys that, hey, maybe this government's not so hot on a 10 plus megawatt Bitcoin mining site in town?
I think the biggest thing, like there was one site that they just didn't want to see it, which I'm
Oh,
like, they're like, yeah, I don't know. There's nothing you could do about that really. But also some people, some governments are against sound, like super, like they've heard horror stories about there being too much noise from Bitcoin mining and they don't want to have that in their town. Totally get that. We learned a little bit of a hard lesson there in Glencoe because we are so close to some residential homes that we had to put up quite a bit of sound blocking, material to make sure that people weren't affected or adversely affected by that. But it it doesn't take a whole lot to make sure that you're blocking that sound and that there's enough space between you and any residential area to make sure it's not going to be a nuisance for them.
thank you for that. I think that's a piece that may be forgotten more on the smaller side of things. If someone who wants to go from the shed in their backyard to a megawatt or two, in a small town, that might be something that gets overlooked, and then you could potentially run into some problems with the local government. So that's good input. Thank you.
Yeah, we we had a couple customers who had a number of machines running in their garage, and they wanted to scale up. And this was before they actually started getting machines. And we had to have that hard conversation with them. I'm like, I don't think you realize the sound and the sheer amount of power and heat that's going to come off of these machines. You don't really want that in your house, even in your garage. And they learned quickly that it was not really feasible to do something like that. And we had another customer that actually got the cops called on them because they were flagged. Their electricity usage was so high, they got flagged because they thought they were growing marijuana. so, so they had to
Oh,
explain their power usage was not due to growing pot, but actually due to Bitcoin mining. So,
I you know I am I it's funny you bring that up. I can't believe that I haven't gotten a single phone call or a knock on the door or anything, because we at my house, I started with a 200 amp panel, maxed that out, upgraded to a 400 amp panel, maxed that out. I'm surprised no one asked any questions. And then on top of that, yes, you learn very quickly that single phase residential power, you're going to run out of that really quickly.
mm,
And it's loud and it's hot, and there's no no good way to really do it in the home. There's okay ways to do it in a garage, and if you got to build out a shed, well, it's tough options for a home miner, that's for sure.
yeah. Yeah. And speaking of the whole marijuana industry, it was interesting when we were first looking at sites, facilities, we were in direct competition with marijuana growers. We're here in Colorado, and so at the time anyone could grow. They've since kind of cut that back and regulated who can grow and how much.
Hmm.
But we were running into issues finding facilities because it was being all taken up by people that were growing marijuana. And if you think about it, the power profile of marijuana growing and Bitcoin mining is very similar, not just in power, but also ventilation, right? You both need a lot of ventilation and a lot of power. And
Yeah.
so, we were in direct competition with a lot of these marijuana guys. We ran into one guy that uh, he originally was growing, and then he felt like it was more profitable to run a Bitcoin mining. So because he had all the power and the space, he converted and started doing Bitcoin mining as opposed to doing marijuana grow.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, and I've heard of reusing the heat from the miners to, to keep that heat for growing marijuana, but that's interesting. Marijuana growing is coming to Minnesota, and I think dispensaries. I don't know a whole lot about the industry, but I know that dispensaries and growing is all starting to work its way through and be legalized. So we'll see if we have that type of competition. It's cold up here, so I don't know how they're gonna do grow operations in Minnesota, but yeah, I guess they're just gonna really consume a lot of electricity.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, so Cody, as we're kind of wrapping up and winding down the conversation, one thing that I always like to ask is, from your opinion, what do you think, one thing that a power company might be missing when a Bitcoin miner company is approaching them? Like, is there something that from your opinion that you think they might be missing if they're turning you guys away or turning a Bitcoin mining operation away?
I think it's just in general the things that we already touched on. The upsides to having a base load there that you get 24/7, and also the ability for that to be firm or non-firm. If you need them to curtail or you need them to shed load, that is an option with most mining outfits, not all. Um, and ultimately it stands to benefit utility companies rather than hurt them. um, yeah.
That's great. Thank you. I like asking because I'm hoping that the audience, is when they're listening can have some takeaways, and some things that can help gain perspective in the Bitcoin mining industry, and some things that the power industry might be able to benefit from, when having conversations with Bitcoin mining operations. Um, so what I'd really love for you to do also, Cody, is how can people get in touch with you and Bit49, and maybe give a handoff for how our listeners can get in touch with you and your company.
Yeah, great question. So they can always visit our website is probably the best way to do it, bit49.io. Bit49.com will also get you to IO. And you could go there and submit a request for repair services, repair training, hosting services, any number of those things. And that's probably the best way to get a hold of us. And then I think it's probably only appropriate before we sign off here to talk about just touch on where Bitcoin is going, because we get that all the time. We get that question, is Bitcoin going to stay around for a year, 2 years, 10 years, forever? It's anybody's guess, but it's definitely not going away. And the reason I say that is we see more and more sentiment as governments print money to oblivion, inflation is out of control. To have an asset, a form of exchange that's not going to inflate, that's not controlled by the government, that allows you to truly exchange, in form of value for goods, without having that baggage, always weighing down your ability, your purchasing power. And will Bitcoin be the future, the only cryptocurrency that survives? I don't think that's going to be the case. But I think cryptocurrency and blockchain technology in general is going to transcend and go long into the future. And it's a technology. One of the reasons why I got into this space and I left physical therapy temporarily, was I saw this as the next big thing. So the internet when it came out. If I was my age when the internet came out and I saw I had an opportunity to participate in that, and help grow the infrastructure and make it what it is today, yeah, sign me up. That's cool. That's exciting. It's interesting. And so I see that same thing here. There's a lot of opportunities for this technology to grow and flourish and be amazing in people's lives and offer so many benefits. And I want to be right there. So
You're yeah, you're touching on every single aspect that has me drawn to this industry, to this asset class. I'm so excited as it's enmeshing itself into the physical infrastructure, our physical electrical infrastructure, the way that it is, and it's becoming an important piece that is getting talked about at power producers. I think it would. I don't think anyone could tell me or talk me out of Bitcoin lasting well into the future, if not forever. And some other, maybe something else comes along the way. I won't be naive to say that that's not a possibility. But yeah, everything you just said is how I feel about it, and I'm so excited to get a chance to play a small little role in it in some capacity.
cool.
Yeah. Well, Cody, really appreciate your time. It's great chatting. You take care.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, Ben.